Okay, so we've started the recording now, and it looks as if there's quite a few of you ready to get going. So, those of you haven't come to any of my sessions before, I'm Rianne, one of the academic skills tutors, and hopefully, if you have come to some of mine or other tutor sessions, you've been finding them useful over these past few weeks, particularly as you're working on writing up your dissertations. So, what we're going to be looking at in the session is really what should go in each chapter when you're writing about your findings and your discussion. And we're going to look at how those sections of your dissertations are linked together, but also how they're linked to your literature reviews. So, to start off, I'd like any of you who wants to comment in the chat box, or as I say, using your microphones, is there anything that any of you would particularly like to learn from today's session so that I know that I am making sure that it is relevant to what you've actually come here for? Okay, I can see a couple of you typing. That's great. Okay, I can see some students have just joined in. I'm just asking whether there's anything in particular that you would like to get from today's session. Okay, Janet, what to read prior over the summer? Okay, so I'm assuming you're a postgraduate and your dissertation is going to be starting probably around now, and you're going to be working on that over the summer. That's great. I can come back to that. Conclusion recommendations. Yes, Sasha. I can definitely go over how your findings and your discussion will lead into your conclusions and your recommendations. Later on, if you feel that you've got more questions around that, please feel free to join in. Oh, Janet, you're an undergraduate. So are you second year at the moment and looking towards doing this next year, maybe? And Ruby, clarity within each section and how it links to the lit review. Yeah, absolutely. So often, okay, that's great. Thanks, Janet. So quite often, as Ruby has said, and one of the things I really want to focus on in today's session is how you keep, if you're writing separate chapters for your findings and your discussion, how you keep them separate, but at the same time have them linked together, because it's very easy to let them really blend into each other a little bit too much. So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So that's brilliant. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so again, what I'd like is for you to let me know what kind of dissertation you're writing, because that's actually going to affect maybe some parts of this session that I focus on a little bit more, because there's lots of different styles of dissertation, and it will often depend on what subject that you're working in, how yours will actually look. So, for example, many of you will be writing a dissertation, and Amanda, sorry, I've just noticed, Amanda, you're looking for literature reviews. Now, we're going to comment briefly on literature reviews. However, my colleague, oh, sorry, you're writing, I might have misunderstood the question. Amanda, do you mean that your whole dissertation is basically a literature review? And yes. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so as say, some of you, and Rikea has already commented, some of you will be writing separate chapters. And you will probably have a chapter for a literature review, a methodology chapter, a findings chapter, and a discussion chapter. And we call that an empirical style of dissertation. Now, some of you might be writing something quite similar, but your findings and your discussion will come together in one chapter. And then others, and I've got a feeling, Amanda, this might be you, that you write what we call a non-empirical dissertation. And that's where you have a short literature review, bits of background, and your methodology. So maybe that you are focusing on literature review in your introduction. And then each chapter, usually about 3 chapters, will each focus on a particular theme or topic for your subject, for your topic. So you would break down your dissertation question into maybe 3 key themes. And in each of those chapters, you will discuss more literature and also what you found out, and you will discuss what you found out. So I can see already that there's a little bit of a mixture going on amongst you. So that's great. And we'll make sure we refer to each of those styles as we go along. Okay. Now, if you're still maybe a little bit unsure about which style that you're going to be writing, it's worth possibly having a conversation with your tutor or your supervisor, because they'll be able to advise you on what the best style is for your subject, but also for your particular project. Okay, because some subject areas you can actually do either, and it'll depend on what your research question is. Oh, sorry, Tina. Okay. Can anybody else not hear me? Sorry, I'm just else not hear me. Okay. So, Tina, uh, I'm sorry, I'm just writing a message to a student who can't hear. Tina, maybe can you see whether you have your speakers on? Okay, that's great. Okay, okay. So, right, so I've got an idea then that you are pretty much all of you coming from this range of dissertations. So, the first thing I'm going to go through is what should be in your dissertation if you're going to have those separate chapters. And then I'll move on to what should go in those more themed, those non empirical chapters. And then we're going to move into looking in a little bit more detail at how you can write each of these different sections or chapters. And along the way, I am going to be asking you a few questions. So it'd be great if you do give your answers in the chat box, but also I've got some polls that I would like you to participate in with some questions. But also, if as we go along, you have got any questions, if you want me to go over anything again, or if you want to ask me anything more about what I'm speaking about, do just put them into the chat box as well. Okay, so those of you who are writing separate chapters, as I said earlier, you need to make sure that you really keep them very clearly distinct. So, doing different things. Each chapter has got its own job to do. And it is quite difficult sometimes to really stick to those specific jobs. So, your findings or your results chapter should really include what we would call summary data. Now, by that, we mean don't just throw all of your findings down on the page. We would call that raw data. Now, by summary data, we mean that you start to organize your findings into maybe graphs or maybe tables. Many of you will be using statistics that go very easily into graphs or tables. Okay. So by that, we mean you pull the data together and you summarize those key findings. So you don't necessarily write down everything that somebody in an interview said, or you don't put all your calculations down there, but you might want to show some calculations if you're using some very specific equations, for example, to show how you've worked out your findings. It will depend on what kind of research you're doing. So, summary data, pulling it together into graphs or tables, or maybe selecting quotes from interviews or surveys that you've used. You also need to think about what main themes are coming out of your findings. Are there trends? Are you finding, for example, that maybe a majority of people you asked a questionnaire of in a particular age group all seem to have the same point of view, a similar answer? Or maybe you're noticing that particular keywords are coming through those responses in interviews or surveys. So think about key themes and trends. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples in a little bit for you to see how that actually looks in your writing. Okay. Uh, and here. Okay. Now, this is where you then have to hold back on what you might want to say about some of those findings. Hold back until the next chapter, your discussion chapter. It's very tempting when you've presented a graph to then say, and I think this suggests X, Y, and Z. I think this may mean X, Y, and Z, or I think I got these results because. That's where you need to hold back and keep those thoughts for your discussion chapter. Because in your discussion chapter, this is where you start to think about, what does this all mean? I've got this information. I've gathered it through my research. Now, what does it mean? Okay, so remember, a dissertation isn't just telling us information that you found out. It's also about, what do you think of that information? So you're going to find lots of phrases like, this may suggest, this could be because. And think about, well, why did I get those results? What could have influenced them? Could it be, for example, that you were asking students of John Moores how they feel they are supported by online teaching, for example, particularly relevant at the moment? Now, the results you got may be different now compared with maybe 3 weeks ago. Over the last few weeks, your tutors will have been working really hard to develop their online teaching skills. So maybe 3 weeks ago, you might have had possibly quite some negative results. But if you ask them now, it might be more positive. Or it might be that you were doing an experiment outside, a scientific experiment outside, and the weather may have influenced the results that you got. This is also Oh, thank you, Rikea. You're trying to help Tina out there. Thank you very much. Um, this is also where you compare what you found with what other researchers. And remember, when you do a dissertation, you are a researcher, just like all of those researchers whose work you read. And so you compare what you found with what they say. So, again, we're going to look at some examples later on to show you different ways that you can do that. So, if you're writing separate chapters, keep them clear, clearly different. So, you present your results, and then in the discussion chapter, you talk about what they mean. However, as I've put here, along the way in your discussion chapter, you're also going to have to refer back to those results. You don't need to repeat everything, but you might want to say, table 3 in the previous chapter shows, or as shown in table 3 in the previous chapter. And that starts to show the connections. And again, I've got a little technique to show you later to really help you see those connections, to help you show them across these two chapters. Now, those of you, however, who are either writing the findings and discussion together or are doing the non-empirical style. So remember, that's where each chapter is like a key theme for your question. Okay. You need to, here, you do need to blend them together. So if you are doing a non-empirical dissertation, remember each chapter really try and focus on a key theme. It might help you to even design like a little, almost like an essay question to help you focus on that key theme. So you'll have your big research question and maybe some aims and objectives. But to help you focus, think about turning each theme into a question. And that really, really helps you. And then you think about it as like almost like a separate essay. Here you will bring in extracts. So I'm sorry, who Amanda, you said you're doing a very literature review based, or we sometimes call that library based dissertation. Many of you will at the moment, particularly because you might have had to change the methods that you were going to use because of the current situation and obviously in lockdown. So you might want to here bring in quotations from some of that literature. You might want to, if you're using archives, if you maybe work in subjects like history, so you're maybe looking at 19th century newspapers, you might want to bring in quotes from that, or maybe from political diaries if you work in those sort of subjects. So you still need to bring in extracts from that evidence. You might, doing this style, you still might have used something like a questionnaire or a focus group. And again, you would bring in quotations from that. But you keep comparing with the literature, and you might have to discuss the literature in more depth in this type of dissertation in these chapters because you haven't got such a big literature review at the start. But remember, each chapter of this style of dissertation is a step in building up your argument because you are building an argument throughout your whole dissertation. So rather than in just a single essay where each paragraph might be a step building up your argument, here it's a whole chapter building up that argument. Okay, now before we move on, based on what I've just covered, are there any questions? As I say, just keep adding them to the chat box as we go along if you've got any questions at all. Okay, I can see some of you are typing. That's great. Okay, Janet. So you're doing a question on mental health. Um, so is that going to be very literature based, or are you looking at policy? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just some of the okay, Janet. All right. So, what might be useful is if, say, by the end of the session, if you want, if your particular questions aren't sort of being answered just yet, you might want to stay on, and we could just have kind of like a private, or anybody else can stay, just have a quick chat about some of your specific queries. That might work, mightn't it? So if you don't mind maybe hanging around on here for 5 minutes after the end, that would be really good. Okay, and the same goes for any of you. If you want to ask me a very specific question about your work, I'm perfectly happy to stay on here for a little while afterwards. Okay, so once you know whether you're writing these separate chapters and what should go in each, or whether these bigger theme chapters and what should go in there, you need to start organizing your information. Now, because I've got a mixture here of undergraduates and postgraduates, that you're probably at quite different stages right now in your dissertation process. Some of you undergraduates, you might be due in a week or two. Some of you postgraduates, you might have months yet. But whatever stage you're at, you can keep these techniques in mind. So once you have gathered your information, you need to start what we would say finding your story. And by that, we mean your dissertation has to kind of hang together as a whole piece of work from start to finish. You start out telling us what you want to find out. Do you want to test a hypothesis? Or is it a little bit more deductive? You've got an interest in a particular area and you want to see what results come out. Or you might be really trying to fill a gap in the research, thinking, nobody's quite looked at it like this before. I want to do that. So you start out with an aim, and the rest of your dissertation is then telling us how you reached your conclusion. So one of you asked earlier about the conclusion and recommendation section. Thinking about your findings and discussion is leading you straight into that final section or chapter, your conclusion and your recommendations, if you need recommendations. So from start to finish, think of it as a story. And you wouldn't pick up a novel to read, or maybe turn on a drama on the television and go to maybe page 10 and then page 3 and then page 27 and then page 15. It wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't get the story. You wouldn't see how the characters develop, how the story develops. And that would mean that those final scenes or those final pages just wouldn't make any sense. So your findings are the heart, are the absolute core of your story. You start off telling us what the story is going to be about, and then you finish off the final chapter, the final scene. So find your story. Where is your story going? Now, That basically means, what have you learned? Every piece of research is about learning. That's why we all do research. We want to learn more. We want to go deeper into our subject. So you start out with wanting to learn something. So go back to those aims, keep them in mind. Maybe if you tend to work in very much the same space, most of us are at the moment, have those aims on post-it notes stuck up on the wall above your desk or your table or your sofa or your bed or wherever you're currently working, and keep looking at them. Keep looking back. It really helps you focus. So, what have you learned? Write down a summary, just a sentence for each main thing you think your research has told you. Once you've done that, it's much easier to start to see that story. So you then start organizing them into groups. Which sentences go together? Are you writing some sentences maybe that actually are all about age groups or all about a key theme that has come through? Or it might be that you've noticed a word, if you're doing maybe a content analysis, a word keeps cropping up in everything that you're looking at. If so, you put those together and then look back at your aims as well and double check that all of those sentences are relevant. Okay, that's really important. Do each of those sentences that you've now put into little groups, okay, with shared characteristics, shared features, are they all doing something to help you answer your questions, answer your aims? But also, don't forget that big picture. What is significant? Are patterns emerging? Okay. What themes, what trends are coming through? Now, many of you might also find that some of your results are surprising. If they are, that's actually kind of good. Sometimes that's absolutely fine because sometimes we find things we just weren't expecting. Don't dismiss them. Or even if you find that if you were expecting to find something and you just didn't, again, that's research. That happens. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means that that's the way your research has gone. So be honest with yourself and talk about, this was surprising. My hypothesis wasn't proven. There's no problem in that. So, okay, now, once you're starting to find your story, you're starting to think, what did I want to find out? What have I found out? Then you can start to organize those chapters. So, if you're writing a separate chapter, really, um, your chapters will look very, very different to each other. There's lots of variations. Okay. So, what I'd like you to do is to think about what could influence the way you present your findings. So, this is kind of how they will look, what that chapter could be, how it could be presented, what is going to influence yours. What's going to make yours maybe different? Maybe Janet's different to Amanda's here. So just take a moment, have a think, and start putting any answers, any thoughts you've got down in the chat box. Okay, I can see some of you typing. That's good. Okay, so say think about what is going to influence the way you present your story, your findings. Thanks, Ruby. Yeah. Oh, Maria, contrasts. So just while some more of you typing, Maria, I'm finding the contrast to what literature has said. However, I didn't specifically include this point in my literature review. Should I try to go back and add it in or just introduce it? That do you know what, Maria? That makes perfect sense. And that happens all the time. Um, don't feel you've got to go back and sort of force it into your literature review. Acknowledge it in your results. And actually, that is then something when you go on to discuss your findings, you can say a lot about. You want to say, actually, my finding is different to what's in the literature. Why might that be? Okay, that's where you're adding to the body of knowledge on your subject. So yeah, just acknowledge it and discuss it. Kind of make kind of quite an important point about it. And Ruby, you've talked about quantitative data and qualitative data will make the main difference. You're absolutely right. So the methodology and the methods you use is going to affect the way your results look. Okay, so if you are doing mostly qualitative research, so you're looking at what people think, how people behave, what they feel, you're usually using a lot of words. So it's unlikely you're going to have a lot of graphs or tables in there. You're more likely to have quotations. Now, you might still want to have maybe a table of how many times a particular word cropped up. That's quite possible. But you're not going to have the same amount of graphs and tables and calculations that somebody using quantitative data. So, data very much based on statistics, on numbers, is going to have. So that is going to be the main difference. So if you are doing qualitative research and you want to look at samples of results chapters, don't get don't be bothered if you're thinking, but I don't have all of these graphs. You shouldn't necessarily. So don't worry about that. So think about your methods. And in a way, we still think about that story. You will have told us what methodology and methods you're using and why. So it makes sense that your results and your findings reflect that. So what we've got, okay, so quantitative results, you might want to show your calculations and you will give figures or tables. But remember, you do still have to do some writing. Don't just give us the graphs, give us the tables. For us to work out what they're showing, tell us. And this is your opportunity to tell the reader, the person marking it basically, what you want them to really look at. So you can, it's almost like you're directing them to what you think is important. So underneath or just before each figure or table, you need to summarize what it shows. Now, sometimes this can feel like you are stating the obvious because you're saying the graph above shows X, Y, and Z. And if you look at the graph, you can see that. You still need to highlight it for the reader, but this is where you then can draw their attention. And this is where you can show analysis in this kind of chapter or section of your dissertation. Point out the significance. So summarize what's in there, but also highlight any trend, any pattern, any significance you want the person reading it to see. Okay, so what I've got for you here is two little examples from a findings chapter. I'd like you to read both of them and just to see the difference between when you just summarize the information and when you highlight significance. I'd like you to tell me through a poll, I'm just going to start now, whether you think A or B is highlighting the significance. So if I start the poll and we've got A or B, just have a quick read of these and think, which do you think is highlighting the significance? Okay. And you can start putting your responses in A or B. So that should have popped up on your screen. Hopefully it has. Okay. Right. Interesting. We're getting a bit of variety in the answers here. And remember, I have to say, this is quite tricky. Okay. It's not an easy question I'm asking you. I am making you think here. Okay, just waiting for a few more of you to respond, and then I can publish the results. Okay. Ooh, sorry about that. Looking very even at the moment. Any final responses? Okay, just give you 2 more seconds. Doesn't matter if you haven't responded or didn't feel quite like you could. Okay, I think right. So quite a few of you have responded. So I'm just going to publish here. Right. This is absolutely fascinating because as you can see, hopefully you can all see, it's absolutely 50-50. Half of you said A and half of you said B. Now, and as I said, this oh, sorry, I'm just moving around the page too much. Okay. It's actually A. Now, if you said B, don't worry. As I said, it is quite tricky. Now, what the difference really is if we see B, and remember, these are good examples of how you can write that little summary underneath your table or your graph. You can see it's only a sentence or two. That's all you need. So in B, we've got, filters A and B were analysed, and the average results are presented in table 6.1. Remember, averaged results, not the raw data, the summary data. It can be seen that they were of similar composition. So the table shows they're of similar composition. That's just telling us, that's just summarizing what's in the graph. But what A does slightly differently is it starts to move beyond saying this just shows that they were similar because it says, as can be seen in the table, home discs are the most frequent source of infection. So it's highlighting a trend, a significance. It's not just saying this is what it shows, it's saying, I want you to see that home disks, this is obviously quite an old piece of research. They're talking about home disks and computer infections, but home disks are the most frequent. So it's not just saying, as you can see, there are lots of different causes of computer infection. It's saying the most important. So it's showing a little bit more analysis. It's saying, out of all of this, the most frequent is home disks. Okay, so there's a slight difference there. Now, qualitative results, though, and many of you will be doing this, would rarely have those tables or graphs, but instead may specific words or quotes. Now, some of you, if you're still kind of gathering your qualitative results together, there is a software program called NVivo. I'm just typing the name in here to the chat box, which a lot of students find absolutely brilliant. You basically, if you've done interviews, you can feed the recordings into it. If maybe you've been looking at, as I say, maybe newspapers and analysing those, you can feed those into this software as well. And it helps you see how often certain words and phrases are coming up. So, in the way SPSS helps you organize your statistical data, and Vivo helps you organize your qualitative data, and it can produce like beautiful kind of mind maps that you could then put into this section of your dissertation. If you want to know more about that, if you want to go along to any of the statistics drop-ins, ask a statistics tutor. It's free to download for LJMU students. If at the end anybody wants more information on that, I can give that to you. But as I say, you would generally focus on the words, but you still need to show patterns and themes. So hopefully you can see this. This is just an example. This is from a dissertation on teaching. So it uses the word pedagogy. That just means teaching. Okay, so we've got phrases like the data reveal that they were all, okay, all the people who were looked at. So that is showing a trend, all. And then it backs up that point with a very short quote. And I didn't put the whole quote in here because it would be too much for you to look at on the page. So I've just put quote from Ahmed here. So Angela suggested, okay, backing up the point, and then Ahmed discussed a similar experience. So it's not just saying all and just referring to one person, it's backing up that by saying there was a similar experience. Then from these comments, two themes emerged. That's the equivalent of saying home disks are the most important cause of infection. It's doing the same. Oh, Julie, you're fine. Just join in. So those so as I say, so using the words, you can still pick out the themes. Okay. So if you want, you can go back and you can look at these in a little bit more detail. And I am going to email you all later on with some further examples for the discussion chapter, really breaking down how students have put their writing together. Okay, so the discussion. Now, this is really the case if you write a separate discussion chapter or if you are blending your findings in your discussion, or, oh, Rakea, do you know what that's a, and I still hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. That is such a good question. Yes, I really, oh, brilliant. I really should have mentioned that. Yes, your results should always be written in the past tense because you have found those out. Okay. In the same way, actually, just a note about writing your methods. We see a lot of methods chapters written in the future tense, and that's because many of you write it before you actually do the research. If that's you and you know you're writing, this research will use a qualitative methodology, go back and start to put things into the past tense, because what you present in your dissertation is, this is what I have done. Okay, so your discussion, as I say, this is where you start to make sense of everything. And if you are writing those blended chapters, the discussion will go all the way through. Okay, so what does it all mean? You've got these results. As I say, you've got to go further than that. Your discussion of your results is often where, to be perfectly honest, a lot of the big marks come from. This is where you can really lift your marks by showing some proper critical analysis. And that is done by thinking, so I've got these results. What does it all mean? Why did I get these results? But also, how do these results fit in to what other people are saying? It's a conversation. It's called a discussion for a reason. So think of yourselves as sitting at a table with all of the authors that you've included in your literature review. And you're all having a conversation because they all work on similar areas to you. You're having this conversation. And, academic author A might say, well, my latest research has shown this. And then that author B might say, but my results actually contradict yours. Maybe there was a problem with your methods. And then you join in. I agree with author B because my results are similar to theirs and also contradict author A. Or it might be, as Maria mentioned earlier, you find a result that contradicts everything else that you've read. That's brilliant. But not only is that brilliant, it opens up an opportunity for you to really think about why. So, well, I support author B more than author A. Maybe author A, there was a problem with their methods. I used a similar method to author B. Maybe that's why we've got similar results. Okay, it's a conversation. So think of yourself in the room at the table, sitting around, talking and discussing. So just to kind of give you a clearer idea of how that then can look, what I've got here is, this is something that you might want to say. Now, remember, you've still got to refer back to some of your key results. Remind us all the time of what those results were. So you might have wanted to have said 83% of respondents said that environmental issues did not influence their travel choices as tourists. That's what you were looking at. Then you follow it up with, that contradicts OK's 2017 argument that most people now consider the environmental impact of tourism. Because remember, you've just said 83%, that's a big majority of people you asked said it didn't matter, it didn't influence. But OK says most people now do think of the environment. So why? Why are they so different? You're showing that comparison. You're at the table. So you might say, oh, OK, my results are different to yours. OK, my 83% of my results said it wasn't an issue. Why might that be? Maybe this project's participants were less concerned than the average, because remember, OK talks about most people. than the average because they were all students. You just asked your friends at John Moores. They were all students on a budget who said low cost was their priority. So if you think about it, that is part of your discussion. 83% said this. That contradicts OK's argument. And you've probably written about OK in your lit review. Why might this be? Maybe it's because of the people I asked. That is showing analysis. And that's the kind of thing you need to be getting into your discussion chapter. So, I said earlier that I would show you a little technique to really help you make those links between your results and the literature, but also between your findings and the literature. Okay, so something like this can really help. Now, any of you who are familiar with some of our sessions will know that we do like these kind of grids. And it's because they organize your work and your ideas and your thoughts really brilliantly. If you don't like the look of a grid like this, if you prefer mind map kind of imagery, that's fine. It works in exactly the same way. But it's the process that's important. So remember when I said, think about that story. This is something you can start doing at that point before you start really planning and writing these chapters. Make a note again of your aim. And if you also have key objectives, make a note of those. And then for each of your aims or aim, note down, remember those sentences? What have I found? And start noting down the key findings. Here, okay, the main ones that you want to write about. Then you need to go back to your lit review, because don't just rely on remembering all of that literature. You will have read really and varies between undergraduates and postgraduates. I think some of you are even PhD. You'll be reading a lot. So you won't remember all of it. So go back over your literature review. And once you have your findings, maybe put each one, oh, you're welcome, Mariam, each one in a different colour. Okay, we do like colour coding as well, but it really, really helps. And then through your literature review, every time you come across a piece of reading that you've done that either supports or challenges your finding, highlight it in that colour. So maybe finding 1 is blue, finding 2 is yellow. Every time you come across something that is related to your finding 2, highlight that author in blue. And it makes it much easier then. And then, so note down, oh, findings 1. Okay, authors 1, 2, and 3 all support this finding. Authors 4 and 5, though, disagree. How do they compare? Straight away, you can start to think about how this is building up your paragraphs in your discussion. Refer back to a key finding, okay, because you're grouping them. So you're already starting to plan how they're going to be organized. And then what secondary literature are you going to bring in? And then the next stage, your critical analysis. What do these findings mean? So jump over from finding 1. What does this all mean? Particularly when you take this into account, what does it all mean? And start to note down any reasons you've got. So, for example, that student looking at choices about tourism, they will have put down, I was just asking students. Students are on a budget. And sometimes being environmentally friendly in your tourism choices is more expensive. Most students, you know, they just want a cheap weekend in Amsterdam with their friends or something. They're not so concerned with thinking about the environment. Although you could maybe say that your generation, for those of you, particularly in the younger generation, are more concerned. Okay, that's quite interesting. All of those thoughts, get them down on here because it's so easy to forget those thoughts. As soon as something comes to mind, write it down. This writes your discussion chapter for you. Or if you're doing the empirical, those main chapters, do one for each chapter. You can see it forming in front of your eyes. And that doing something like this is how you then achieve this kind of really nice comparison with literature and then analysis. Okay. So, what I've got for you now is again just using that poll, just so I've got an idea of what you're thinking. I've got 4 short little extracts from the discussions of 2 different dissertations. So, the first 2 come from a non empirical history dissertation. So, from the type of chapter that is just all based around a big theme. The second 2 are from a more empirical style. So, from a separate discussion chapter. And what I'd like you to do, again, using the polls, is to tell me what you think the student is doing in that bit of writing. So, remember, in your discussion, you compare with the literature. You try to say what you think your results mean. And you also need to try and explain why you got those results. So, as I say, there's 3 of them. And then what I'm going to do is because I didn't want you all to sort of spend time right now reading through kind of much longer extracts, I will email you the much longer extracts that these little snips have come from. And I'll show you in a moment, but I've broken them down to show you what the student is doing in each section. So I will get that to everybody as well. So, next slide. Okay, so hopefully, again, you can see these. So, this would suggest that Labour under Blair had ideologically changed, as much of Labour's policy throughout the 1980s and early 1990s was a complete and utter rejection of Thatcher's neoliberal agenda. If you don't know what neoliberal is, if you don't know who Thatcher was, anything, don't worry. You don't need to worry about what it's saying, but it's more, what do you think the student is doing? Now, do you think they are A, comparing with literature, B, finding meaning, or C, suggesting reasons for their findings? So, do you think they're comparing with literature, finding meaning, or suggesting reasons? Okay. Because I do think sometimes when you see just little bits like this, and these are real John Moore students, okay? And this was a history dissertation from last year, from an undergraduate, and the other extracts we're going to look at were from about 2 years ago from a master's student in international business. Okay. Okay. So A, comparing with literature, B, finding meaning, C, suggesting reasons for their findings. Okay, just wait another moment. Some of you are still thinking. Okay, I'll just give you 2 more seconds. Okay, it's looking quite interesting so far. Okay, any more? Okay, so I will publish the results. Right, so again, this is quite interesting. Now, I'm really pleased none of you saw this as comparing with literature. Okay, so um, why? Can I just ask anybody want to say why they didn't think there was any comparison with literature? Might be quite obvious, but what would you expect to see there if you were comparing with literature? Brilliant, Maria. Yep, and Amanda. Absolutely. Oh, brilliant. Janet, Terry Ann, great. Obviously. And Chloe, just get Chloe's answer. Yeah, there's there's no references there. There's no this supports, this contradicts. This is also seen in. And so we know that this is purely based on the students' own kind of ideas. Now, 33% of you thought it was B, finding meaning, and 67% of you thought suggesting reasons for the findings. Right. Now, it's actually B, finding meaning. So well done, those of you. But don't worry if you put C, because I think I know why you did. And it's probably this word here, suggest. It might be a little bit mean, me putting that in there. But we have what we've got here is this would suggest that Labour under Blair had ideologically changed. Okay. Now, if we were looking for reasons for their findings, we would expect to see maybe some reference to their methods or something like that in there. Or something that might have influenced what they found. But I think this this would suggest probably led some of you astray there. So we'll try another one. And this is from the same dissertation. So again, A for comparing with literature, B for finding meanings, and C suggesting reasons for findings. Okay. Oh, I better actually put the poll up, hadn't I? Start a poll. Okay. A, B, and C. So Thorpe 2050 echoes this point, suggesting the Blair strategy was to. Da, da, da. And I have also noticed that there probably should also be a page number in there. So any eagle eye reference people amongst you. Yeah, this is looking good. One of my questions earlier may have just also helped you with this. Okay, just give you another couple of seconds. Okay. Okay, last chance. Right. I will. Okay. Now, yes. Okay. We've got a comparison with literature here. Now, a couple of you also put suggesting reasons for findings. Now, I I can maybe see why a couple of you did actually put that. Oh, sorry, I keep jumping about between these pages. If those of you who did put C, if you want to give your explanation in the chat box, feel free to, because it doesn't matter that you didn't kind of get that right there. And I think I might know why you saw suggesting reasons as well. So if you want to sort of give me your explanation, that's great, and we can sort of work through that. But if not, I'll come back to what could possibly be a reason in a moment. But yes, what we've got is the comparison with literature. And I kind of chose this little bit because I think it's actually written quite nicely. You know how often, and actually what I've been saying a lot so far in this session is this is supported by, this contradicts. Now, this gives a slightly different style. Thorpe echoes this point. And that's quite nice because what it's doing is saying almost my research comes first, and I am using that literature to help develop and show where my research fits in. So it's rather than I support Thorpe, it's more like Thorpe supports me. That's quite nice in some ways. But I think seeing that great Ruby, I'll just come back to that in a second because I think, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. So Thorpe echoes this point. Now, this little bit comes straight after this. So I'm finding meaning. This would suggest this. Thorpe echoes this point. Okay, so that's a nice variation for your kind of your use of language. Before we finish, I will also just make sure that you all know about the Manchester University Phrase Bank, which can really help you develop this kind of phrase really nicely. So, Ruby, use the literature to give meaning or support for a previous finding, backs previous points up. Yes, that's what I thought, because in a sense, what you're seeing here, those of you who put C, is that in some ways, the reason for that finding could also be found in the literature. And I can see where you were going with that. And actually, in some of these non-empirical dissertations, sometimes that is a little bit blurred. I was also thinking, so yes, and Mariam obviously agreed with Ruby. So Ruby and Mariam, or anybody else, if you want, are you seeing that actually it's the comparison with literature, but you can use literature to help support why you might have got the findings you did? So this student was actually looking at political diaries of people like Tony Blair. And so people like Thorpe were saying, oh, I think this shows, these quotes show this is what Tony Blair was thinking. And this student is sort of saying, well, yeah, I kind of agree with that. But they've done it very cleverly, and they've kind of led with, this is what I think. Thorpe agrees with me. So if we go on to the next one. Okay, so again, comparing with literature, finding meaning, suggesting reasons for findings. If I start the poll, A, B, and C. Okay, so again, as the percentage of male respondents, remember we've changed dissertation now. This is about international business management. And it's a pure discussion chapter, not the blended sort. As the percentage of male respondents was significantly higher than females, the high national results could have been artificially high, and many have been lower if that should have said may have been lower if there were an equal number of males to females. Okay. Okay, give you another few seconds. I think I can see where the majority are going. Okay, give you one more second. Oh, I'll be generous. I'll give you 2 more seconds. Right. Okay, so uh I'll sort of publish where the results where we're up to. Yeah, great. Now, um, the majority of you have gone for C, suggesting reasons for your findings. Great. Okay. Um, those who've gone for B, I mean, in some ways, again, it is searching for meaning. And what I think these are actually showing us is something quite interesting, I think, and I think your answers are giving us something really interesting because it's very easy, in some ways, for somebody like me who looks at hundreds of dissertations every year, hundreds, to be very easily see these different sections. But, and this is something that, as I say, I think your responses today are actually telling me is there is some blending and blurring between them, isn't there? As Ruby and Mariam said, in response to the last question, that use of literature may also be a way of finding reasons for the findings. The literature might be helping to explain those reasons, and some of you here finding meaning. Actually, if you are suggesting reasons for your findings, you are also finding meaning. So I can see where some of you are coming with this, and I find that that's actually really interesting. And I'll remember your responses to this for the future. But there are still some quite clear differences. And what we've got here is a, a clear, this is why the results could have been like this. So obviously the results that males responded more highly than females. But, and that might have skewed the results of what they were looking at, that more men answered than women. And possibly, if it was more even, the results could have been different. Quite often, we see that is maybe sort of gender, like I say, with age, can sometimes influence the results in things like questionnaires and surveys. And but also, I chose this one because it does something again really quite nicely, and it's got this caution could have been artificially high. This, should say, may have been lower. So it's not saying, right, this is the reason why I got these results. It's saying maybe it was because of this. Now, this academic caution, we call it, is really important in all academic writing. Because remember, nothing is absolutely, oh, we'll come on to that one in a second. Nothing is absolutely certain in the academic world. Somebody can always come along and question your thinking or your results. So bringing in words like it may be, this could suggest, brings that caution in, and it actually ends up making it more academic. You don't want it all to feel very uncertain, but certainly bringing in some of those kind of phrases helps. Obviously, your conclusion, you need to come in that little bit more strongly with your argument. But remember, these are all leading into your conclusion. So maybe it's because of this. By the end of this chapter, you need to sort of come to a firmer answer for your conclusion. Now, the last one, very last one, I've not done this as a poll because this is something that is maybe quite easy to forget about. So I'd like you to have a look at this, and any of you write your answers in the chat box this time. Which further feature of your discussion, which we shouldn't forget, but we've maybe not mentioned for a while, does this little section show? What is this doing? By having this in the discussion, what is the student doing? So any thoughts, start putting them into the chat box. Great, I can see quite a few of you putting some ideas in there. Give you another couple of moments. Great. Okay. So we've got Rakaya saying this is showing a trend. Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's reminding us of a trend that's come through, isn't it? Andrew, identifying areas of possible sample bias. Brilliant. Okay. Yes, because it's saying, right, these were these were my results. Now we need to think, oh, is this possibly again why we've got these results? Could there be a bit of bias? That's really excellent response. Because that's something, if you are using a sample to really think about commenting on. Mariam, it's about the participants. Janet, data analysis. Ruby compares the two countries. It can give more discussion further down the line. Yes, absolutely. It's opening up another aspect to talk about. And Julie, it's referring to the data and suggesting the data results. It's doing all of those things in one little phrase. Because what it's doing is it's reminding us this was a trend in my results. That's great, Andrew. Maybe we need to go back to some of the methods, even the sample, and see if there's some issues going on there. We're getting a little bit more about, we're being reminded of who participated in this research and what, it was about respondents. Oh, hello, Tina. You managed to.
Yeah, I managed to get it all finally.
Oh, that's great. It's and that it's about England and India, and it's suggesting those results. So don't forget these little phrases referring back to your results in your discussion. It's almost like refer to it really briefly, table X, and then you can move on. And as Ruby says, open up that discussion afterwards. That's great. Okay, so as I was just saying, I kind of forgot this was coming up. Remember that caution throughout your discussion section. So don't rush in with, I've got the answer. Stop, pause, and think, and add that caution in there. It's believed, it can be argued, would, could, may, or might. Okay. Any questions? Because we're almost kind of finishing off now. If you've got any sort of questions, pop them into the chat box for me to kind of try and respond to before we finish. Now, it's quite possible this is a little bit too much writing on the screen for you to currently look at, but I will be sending you this resource as well, so you can always have a look at these yourselves. But basically, what I'm showing you, and the next one is then a little bit more about language for your discussion section, is, sorry, Tina, it's brilliant you've been able to return. Are you able, unless you want to say something, to mute your mic? So if you see the little mic button down at the bottom of the screen, oh, that's excellent. It's just because of the bit of feedback. But obviously unmute anytime you want to speak. Okay. Don't sort of feel you can't speak. So right. So I mentioned earlier the academic phrase bank from Manchester. So if I just share my screen briefly, this, if you've not already discovered it, is absolutely brilliant. It has, I'll just see, are we sharing there? Okay, so if we go here, so what this does is it gives you these kind of like sentence starters almost, which you can use, and it's not plagiarism. You don't need to worry about that. But for example, along the top here, you've got different things that you might want to do. So, for example, discuss your findings. And then you might want to indicate an unexpected outcome. And it gives you phrases to start using. So that is a really great resource. Okay, so the Manchester University Phrase Bank. Tell you what, if I'll put the link in the box, in the chat box, and then if any of you want, you can kind of copy that. Let's see if I put that in there. But it's really is an excellent. Oh, it is, Ruby. Brilliant. Okay, so if I stop sharing my screen, okay, and we're back. Okay, so before we finish, then, just like to think about what we've covered, and maybe also think about where you personally are in your own dissertation. As I say, some of you could be really just thinking about editing your findings and discussion chapter, and some of you may well be thinking, okay, how do I need to think about what I will write in a couple of months' time? So if any of you have thought there's just one thing from this session I'm going to take away and really make sure I'm going to try and do, what would it be? Any thoughts? Okay. And sorry, Tina, hopefully you can hear me just as people are starting to write in the box. Hi. Obviously I'm really sorry this all got a bit muddled for you. But the recording will be available on conferences. And now you are here. If you want to hang around, I think a couple of other people are going to, and ask me any particular questions once the session kind of officially finishes, then I'm happy to do that for you. Okay, so Julie, Janet, yeah. Okay, so yeah, academic caution, Julie. Honestly, it makes such a difference to the style of your writing. Janet, don't worry, you've not started it yet, but hopefully this is just giving you an idea of what they need to kind of look like using the grid. Yeah, do you know what? Those grids are so useful. They really are. Yeah. And also, if say you are still in those early stages, then you can use a really similar type of grid for building up your literature review as well. So as many of you just finishing writing off some comments. Now, obviously, for the foreseeable future, we're going to be carrying on doing a lot of these webinars, and we're also looking at maybe recording. Oh, that's great, Mariam. Also recording some short sessions, which we would make available, and then we would be available in person afterwards for kind of question and answer sessions. So there's going to be loads going on. And also remember, you can always book a virtual one-to-one with us as well. But tomorrow, if any of you are interested, I'm doing at 10 o'clock, just for an hour, a dissertation question time. Basically, I'll be on here. You can come in and you can ask me anything you want about your dissertations. If I can't answer the question, I might well be able to help you find the answer. Okay, I'll kind of know how to go about it. Or it might be a case that you've got to go back to your supervisor, but come along. You're all going to get the invitation. Everybody in Canvas will. And you can stay for the full hour, or you can just pop in, ask your question. Once it's dealt with, you can leave. Okay. And also, my colleague Dorin is going to be doing a session tomorrow afternoon on undergraduate literature reviews. However, just because it's for undergraduates doesn't mean some of you postgrads can't go. Okay. So that would be really good. And next week, got a whole range of sessions because some of you are also still writing essays, reports, case studies, as well as your dissertations. So we're looking at the session on writing really good introductions and conclusions. Another one on how to write just a brilliant paragraph. These might seem like quite straightforward things, but those are the building blocks for all of your writing. If you get your paragraph structures right, the rest really follows. Also, summarizing and paraphrasing. Are you wondering how to really bring in short summaries from your literature? And then how to make your writing more critical, as well as finishing off with another question time and editing and proofreading. For your dissertations, make sure you leave time at the end to edit and proofread. And again, I think it's Dorin doing that session. She's going to go through some of those things to really look out for when you're editing. So hopefully there'll be something for all of you next week that kind of you think could be really useful. So thank you very much. I can't believe it's absolutely bang on 12:30. I normally run over because I just keep talking. You're welcome. So hopefully that's been useful. And as I say, the recording will be available in conferences. It usually takes about an hour to process and then it's available. But I will email all of you. As I say, it is I'll show you all very, very quickly. Those little extracts I took from these bigger extracts, and I will send this as well as the slides to you. This is just so that you can see kind of how it looks. So what you can see is I've broken these sections from a discussion down and written next to it, what is the student doing? So you can see different ways that you can compare with literature, find meaning, and so on. And so that could be really useful. So I'll make sure once the group list has also been produced, again, it can take about an hour. I will email all of you with that. So honestly, thank you. You've asked some brilliant questions, and I think some of your responses to those polls have been really, really good as well. Certainly made me think too. So thank you, and hopefully kind of see you in the next virtual world. Anybody, I know, Tina, you might want to, and I'm terribly sorry, but I know somebody else thought they might stay behind to ask something. thing. Who was it? It was all the way up. Oh, I think was it Janet? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember. Somebody thought, hang on, Janet. Yes, great. Okay, so that's great. And like I say, I mean, anybody else, if you want to hang around for a little bit, I could probably sort of stay on here for another sort of 10 minutes or so, if that's useful for anybody to ask anything. So, but if you're done, that's great. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. So, Janet, what was it that you were um sort of wanting to ask? I think you're now, am I right? You said your second year, is that right? And you're thinking about next year. Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, then you're thinking about. Have you been asked to do anything this summer about like maybe writing a research proposal, or are you actually just really ahead of the game? You've been asked to do some reading. Okay. So I think probably some of the best places to start are some basic reading around doing research. Um, I think to give you a real sense of what what we mean by things like, are you doing research methods? Okay, so I think probably a little bit more reading around research methods. Um, Firstly, to think about what methods might make sense to you that you might think you'd like to use. But it also means that when you're reading more about doing a dissertation, that you feel a bit more confident in some of these, or maybe in terminology that's being used, or kind of yeah, terminology or explanations and things like that. So what you could maybe do, if I actually go on to the web page, now if I big blue button, if I share my screen, I might be able to share my screen. If we go into the library, library. Now, I'm thinking of a little book in particular called Doing Research, and I'm just wondering if it's available online. Doing research. Okay. That's what I'm thinking of. Gary, right. Okay, now, temporarily unavailable. Oh, although saying that, okay, now if I sorry, if I just come back to the oh, has that not shown? I'm really sorry. I need to keep reading my screen. Discover, doing research. Okay, is that hopefully working? Okay, now these two little books by Gary Thomas are really, really excellent, and they're called they're from a little series around academic skills, and they're small. They're I don't know if you see this on the screen. They're only like little pocket books. They're really, really good. Now, they're saying, I thought we had an online version of them, but if we go into Macmillan pocket study books. Okay, I'm going to see if I can get them for you another way. Bit books doing research, because what a lot of publishers have done is made online versions of a lot of their books completely free at the moment. So it is really good. If it was not possible, let's see. Let's see if we can get into. So what I'm doing for you now is seeing if I can get a free online copy for you. Okay. Okay. Right. Now, this might seem slightly longer way round about doing it, but I've just found that I'm just sending you a link there. I don't know, are you able to sort of copy it? That takes you to a page with Macmillan Publishing, who publish these little books. And they say that because of the COVID-19, if you click on a link and request as a student access to an ebook that you wouldn't normally have access to, it seems as if they're giving you access. So that is really, really useful. Also, Sage Publishing, right? Sage Publishing, Sage Research Methods, which is available in our library, is also really useful. So Sage Research Methods. Okay. So, oh no, sorry, I'm going wrong. Oh, I know. Oh, I'm so stupid. I've just thought, right, if I come back here, right, Sage Research Methods. If you go into, I'm just typing you. Oh, Janet, okay, don't worry. That's fine. I didn't realize you weren't there anymore. So you're doing the research methods. Now, found these two little books. If you can see, no, I've changed it. Right. There's two little books, okay, by Gary Thomas, called Doing Research. And they're really short and perfect for undergraduates doing research. And the link I've put here, just above, takes you to a page where you can access it free online, just because of the current situation. Got one on dissertation. Okay. Okay, so possibly for a bit more research methods then. Sage Research Methods. Now, if you go to this module's homepage, go to Academic Skills Resources, Dissertations, you'll find a tile there for this resource, because it's really, really good. So that could be really worth you having a look at. Okay, so in this module, I'm not sure if I can kind of get onto it without losing this. On the homepage, you go to resources, and then go to academic writing, go to dissertations, and you'll see a tile there and Sage Research Methods. Or you can just go into, Discover, just the library website, and it'll take you straight in as well. That is really good. And if you've already got a book generally on writing a dissertation, that will take you into your methods a little bit more deeply. But also, what I suggest you do, Janet, is have you got, can you put undergraduate dissertations? Do you, going to go out. Oh, that's fine, Tina. And yes, come along tomorrow. Come to the question time. I'm sorry, it's got a little bit muddled up for you today. The example of PhDs. Oh, oh, mm. Oh, are you, Janet? Are you looking at where it says sample? Okay. Do you know what? Hopefully I won't lose us. Let's see if I go to home and then. Okay, I'm seeing if this is easier. Going to research and dissertations. Right. Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen again and I'll show you because I think I know what you're looking at. Okay. Chrome tab. Let's see. Okay, hopefully this will come up. Okay, so is this what you're looking at? And you were looking at here, sample dissertations. Yeah, yeah, they are. Because it's only the PhDs which get kind of stored centrally. We just get our samples from students, really asking their permission, of course. Here, this online database, that's where you can go in and you can start to explore a little bit more about different research methods that you might be interested in. It is a very, very good resource. Also, what I would suggest you do is at the moment you're needing to do some reading, and I think, to be honest, I think you're doing absolutely the right thing. You're coming to things on dissertations, you're thinking about that reading, about your methods and your methodology. Have you thought yet what topic or area you want to do your dissertation on? Of course, yeah, you mentioned mental health. Okay. So, as well as finding out about methods, what you need to start to do is to narrow your focus down. So you want to do something on mental health. So you need to be, and I imagine you already are, and if this is an interest of yours, you're probably already doing some reading, some general reading on mental health, is to think about what particular aspect of mental health you want to work on and start to narrow some of your reading down. If you're finding in quite general reading around mental health that particular themes or particular topics keep cropping up, they keep being talked about quite often, that might be worth you support. Okay, so you're starting to narrow it down. So I would suggest at the moment, then develop a little general question for yourself. Now, this doesn't mean this is going to end up being your research question, but it will start to help you read with purpose. So think about what is it about support and mental health that you want to look at. And think about turning that into a question. Okay. Right. Do you know what? You've actually, it sounds like you're going about this really, really the right way. So you want to look at support practitioners' awareness of mental health. Great. So that means that you're already really starting to narrow it down. Write yourself a question. You know how earlier I said if you were doing these kind of non-empirical dissertations, almost write a question for yourself for each chapter. Do that kind of now because that will focus you in even more and start to be aware of whether through your reading are lots of people saying the same thing? Are they covering the same thing? Or is there something that you're thinking about and they're just not covering? because you don't want your dissertation to end up just being repeating what everybody else has said. Remember, you're joining the conversation. You're adding just that little bit. And at undergraduate level, honestly, it's only a tiny little thing that you need to say that you're doing, which is a little bit different. It's not like when you're doing PhD, it's got to be really original. So just so that you know, you can say something a little bit new, a little bit different to what everybody else is saying. So turn your interest into a question. Use that to start focusing your reading and be aware of what themes keep coming up, what key topics keep coming up, and what are people generally saying about those key themes and those key topics. Because that will help you start to narrow your focus down even more. Okay, so I'd say definitely a bit more reading about your research. Yes, up to now, lack of. Oh, right. Do you know, you really are going about this like absolutely. You're so kind of prepared. Up to now, lack of funding. So that's what's coming through quite a lot. Okay, now you might want to still look at lack of funding, but maybe in order to do something a little bit different, you might want to think, okay, so I'm reading a lot about lack of funding, but how maybe could that affect a particular organization in my local area rather than just generally? Or what do practitioners think funding should be spent on? Or what do practitioners think could be the main reason for lack of funding? I mean, obviously, without knowing the subject area, those could be completely obvious questions. But you're narrowing it down. You've got mental health practitioners' perspectives, support practitioners' perspectives on mental health, awareness of mental health, lack of funding. You're narrowing it down all the time already. You're doing exactly the right thing. So develop that question just to keep you focused. Think about who is saying what big themes coming out, lack of funding, but is there a little room just for you? Is it that nobody is looking particularly at, as I say, a particular type of organization in a particular kind of demographic, kind of like socio-economic area or something like that? But also primary school. Okay, so right now, that potentially opens up a lovely little case study, doesn't it? Maybe in looking at generally, and then looking at a particular primary school, or maybe comparing two. Yeah. So that also means then if you're thinking potentially case study, then you need to be looking for reading on case studies, but also qualitative research, I'd say, because it's about perspectives, isn't it? It's about awareness. So then think, okay, if I want to know what their awareness is and it's a case study, how am I going to know how aware they are, what their awareness is? Sounds also like an issue around training. Are you going to think, well, actually, I might individually interview people? Would that get you the information? Or do you think, actually, I'd like to be part of a big discussion and hear how these practitioners talk to each other about it? Then it might be a focus group. So think about, what information do I want? How do I, maybe, or a questionnaire? Yeah, questionnaires would be great. I think, though, potentially at the moment it would need questionnaire, but, you know, you might also think, well, okay, a questionnaire. Are you going to have closed questions? Yes or no answers? Or, like a scale, mark 1 to 10, how strongly you feel. That would end up actually being a little bit more quantitative because then you're working with numbers of respondents. Or is it going to be a bit more open? Or might be a mixture of both. So the open would allow the participants to write fuller responses. So you're narrowing it out. You know you want to look at mental health and practitioners' awareness of mental health. And you know that lack of funding is an issue. That's possibly a really good area to look into. And then think, right, so this is the information I want. How do I think I'm going to get it? And then start doing that little bit more reading around the methods. Okay, good, Janet. Does that help a little bit more? But keep an eye on a starter question all the time. That might change. That might well change, but it just gives you. Otherwise, you can end up just like, I'm just reading the same thing about funding and mental health. I'm reading the same thing over again. Right, I need to shift my focus, find something new. That's great. Okay, so Rikea and Terry Ann, you're both typing here as well. That's great. Yeah, so I've got like 5 more minutes. But honestly, any questions, just pop them in and I will deal with them. Ah, right. The page, this one that I'm showing you. Okay. I'll just see what Terry Ann is saying, and I'll go back and I'll take you through. Oh, great, Terry Ann. Oh gosh, you're very organized on your course, aren't you? Brilliant. So if I go back here, right now, hopefully. So if we go, okay. So the home page, I'm just going to check. Okay, so you can see me moving pages. So you know the home page then for this module. If you go down, you see academic skills resources. Go in there. And then obviously we've got all sorts. Then go to research and dissertations. Okay. And again, we've got some resources here going over some kind of key features. These are all PhD samples, but they can still give you an idea if you're not PhD of kind of layout and how to maybe organize content pages and things like that. But then we've got this, okay? Sage research methods. And then you click on there and look at that, learn about quantitative methods, definitions, videos. Now, they're all looking as if they're locked. They're not locked. You will probably just have to sign in with your John Moore's account, but you have got access to everything on there. Okay, just yeah. Okay, tens of web pages. That's great. Okay. All right. Thank you. Hey, Julie. Um, You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. So I'm going to finish now. It looks as if, because the recording was only meant to last an hour and a half, and obviously we've gone over, that the recording, it might have just sort of automatically finished recording after an hour and a half. So if it has, and you wanted to go back to look at any of this like little add-on sort of information and it's not there, just contact me at any time and I can sort of follow that up for you. All right. So, oh, well, good luck, all of you, with your dissertations and see you again soon. Okay. Okay. You're welcome. Okay.
You are currently the only person in this conference.